Some scholars observe in Ketura's name resonates with the word for incense. Others see in the eastward movement of her sons a re-echoing of the post-garden eastwardness of humanity. Tradition also links Midian, one of her sons, with figures such as Jethro, the priestly host among whom a later Israelite leader would find rest and counsel. These connections are not proof of modern lines of descent. They are the way the ancient world recorded kinship and influence. We do well to speak cautiously, as the book itself is concise about these things. Listen to the rhythm here. The choice beneath a tree sets a pattern, but God's faithfulness threads through human brokenness. Adam and Eve's error did not halt God's plan. It opened a story in which God would work through unexpected marriages and forgotten names. Abraham's later marriage to Keturah is a quiet example, a late-age renewal of family life that yields offspring who, though not the carriers of the covenantal promise, nevertheless spread Abraham's seed into new territories. The fragrance of Keturah's name, incense, serves as a small symbolic whisper. What is ordinary and domestic can rise in aroma and be part of God's ordering. There are 3 lessons that emerge like stones laid across a river, guiding our steps when we seek to follow the currents of Scripture into our lives. First, God's purposes persist beyond our failures. The garden's brokenness did not finally defeat God's plan. It set the need for redemption into motion. Second, ordinary persons and unnoticed unions carry eternal consequence. Keturah's children, born in a quieter season of Abraham's life, are testimony that God's blessing travels through many hands. Third, legacy is not merely the prolongation of a single line, but the weaving of many threads into the tapestry of God's promise. These truths do not cancel pain or erase grief. They reinterpret them within the economy of God's fidelity. Consider for a moment what that means for you. If a choice you made carved a scar in your life, you are not outside of God's ordering. If you have felt that the small, faithful acts you offer, feeding a neighbor, praying in an unlit room, giving quietly, remember the sons whose names fill a brief paragraph in Scripture. Remember the woman named with a word like fragrance. Small things may become part of how God distributes blessing across generations. Do not assume that visibility equals value. God often plants meaning in what the world calls obscure. The narrative carries us forward to a place of sober wonder. The Edenic rupture required a plan for reconciliation that would not be completed in a single century or by a single household. Yet God's patient weaving means that even when the immediate line of promise rests with one child, Isaac, other children and peoples are not left to the margins.
They move eastward to their own histories, carrying names and stories that will brush against God's wider purposes in ways Scripture sometimes hints at and other times leaves to the imagination of the faithful. There is a quiet scene to imagine after Sarah's tent is folded and before the sons of Keturah take their gifts. Abraham, now aged and having seen both promise and tragedy, gathers the household at his tent door. The sun lays itself low on the encampment, and the scent of evening, dust softened by cooling winds, moves through the flaps. He speaks in measured words, giving gifts into the hands of those who will walk away eastward. The moment feels like a benediction and a commissioning both. Go into the land of the east. Take with you what will sustain you. The gifts are not mere wealth. They are tokens of favor, instruments of blessing. Isaac, standing apart, remains the inheritor of covenant. The family disperses, the caravan tracks etch the sand, and the house of Abraham extends in ways that human eyes cannot yet fully discern. As history will show, the consequences of that scattering are manifold. Some lines intersect with Israel's story in helpful ways. Others live as parallel threads. What matters theologically is the demonstration that God's promise does not constrict blessing to a single visible line. From Eden's fall to Abraham's old age, God continues to act, ordering, preserving, and inviting humanity into a Redeemer narrative that will one day meet its fullness. Soon we will turn to the deeper implications of this continuity, how the promise given after exile in Eden finds focus in the lineage that leads toward redemption, and yet simultaneously branches into the lives of ordinary people whose faithfulness matters. We will examine how the incense-like name of Keturah refracts the theme of ordinary offerings rising before God, and we will draw 3 practical applications for your daily life: how to live with hope when doors close, how to steward small acts with an eternal perspective, and how to value relationships both visible and quiet. For now, rest with the picture: a garden, a choice, exile, a promise, and an aged patriarch giving gifts beneath a settling sky. The story is wider than a single family and kinder than our fears about mistakes. There is more to tell: how specific descendants shaped the map of nations in ancient memory, how prophetic voices later echo the ordering of God's justice and mercy, and how the long arc from Eden to Golgotha bends toward restoration. We will return to the texture of these links and draw them into the life you live today. If we follow that benediction under the low sun a little farther, we begin to see how the economy of promise works not by erasing failure, but by reweaving it. The arc that departs from Eden bends toward a hope that is patient with time.
Learn to honor those in your household who bear the covenant openly, and at the same time, bless the quieter presences that sustain life. The friend who stands in silence, the distant cousin who remembers anniversaries, the servant who labors without complaint. Do not measure worth by renown. God's economy is measured instead by faithfulness and fruitfulness, sometimes observable, sometimes hidden. Beyond these practicalities, there lie larger patterns in history. From the dispersion of Abraham's house come peoples who shape neighboring lands, alliances that later meet Israel in trade and war, and folk memories that inform how nations remember their origins. Prophets, centuries later, will recall the justice and mercy that were sown in ancestral times, and will warn that the true measure of a people is how it treats the widow, the orphan, the stranger, the very sorts of persons who emerge from the quieter lines of lineage. The long thread from Eden's sorrow through Abraham's tent bends toward a redemption that is both intimate and cosmic. The cross at Golgotha will show in its own time that God's reconciling action seeks the whole of creation, not only a favored few. Picture now the caravan as it finally unfurls eastward beneath a sky threaded with stars. The men of Keturah walk with gifts slung upon beasts, children run at the flanks, and elders speak of places they mean to find. Isaac remains at the wellsprings of the primary promise. The house multiplies in ways the first hearers could not foresee. The encampment's smoke rises, carrying with it the incense-like labor of many lives, prayers, labor, sorrow, joy, and these ascend beyond sight into God's keeping. Hold that image as you move about your days.
Let it shape how you name your losses and how you render your service. Remember, the divine promise preserves a center, yet scatters blessing. It commands fidelity, yet employs many hands. The world that reads itself by one line alone misses the breadth of God's concern. The faithful heart learns to live both within the center and at its margins. There is more to trace, the ways in which particular descendants later appear on the stage of history, the echoes of Abraham's faith in later covenant-making prophets, the manner in which ordinary offerings are taken up into the divine economy of redemption. For now, remain with the picture of the tent at dusk, a man blessing those who will depart, gifts given with both restraint and largesse, the horizon open and darkening. The story presses on, history carries its own weight of sorrow and hope, and God's weaving continues. So keep watching how small things answer great promises. The generations that move out from the tent do not vanish into mere footnotes. They become living channels. Some find soil and root. Others remain swift travelers, traders of oils and stories. Some meet the folk of other lands and take wives from among them. Marriages become bargains and bridges both.
Trade routes open where a single caravan once passed. A grave on a hill marks the place where a woman's name is kept by a few and forgotten by most. A proverb is born where a mother's admonition was heard and later repeated by a stranger. This is how memory grows, not by proclamation alone, but by the steady rehearsal of ordinary lives. And when kingdoms rise and fall, the memory of those lives is called to account. The prophets will remind a people that faithfulness is not a marker of pedigree, but of conduct. How you feed the hungry, how you judge the widow, how you offer shelter to the stranger. They will hold up the patriarchs as names that stand for covenantal fidelity, yet their accusations will also be against the comfortable who neglect the lowly. Thus the past becomes a standard and a rebuke. It is both a lamp and a plumb line. The story of a household that sent sons into the borderlands becomes, in prophetic speech, an image of God's patience and God's demand. Do not suppose that blessing flows only in triumphal arcs. Blessing often moves like a stream, diverted here and there, pooling in unexpected places. There are exiles who carry the promise in their speech. There are captives who pray, and their prayers come back one day as new songs in a younger tongue. There are marriages made in haste that lead to households that bless nations. There are bargains made in fear that later become schools of mercy. The economy of God's work is complex. It accepts the contingency of human choice and yet accomplishes its ends by persistent means. The slow work of character, of neighborliness, of uncelebrated fidelity. That is the medium in which great things are usually born. Therefore, live as one who knows how to plant and also to entrust the harvest. Plant with hands willing to labor and eyes ready to let fruit ripen beyond your sight. Bless without demanding recognition. Teach without promising honors. Give without counting the ledger of return. When you name your children, speak not only of your hopes, but of obligations. When you govern a house, remember that every small mercy is a seed for a future justice. The household that keeps the covenant in word and deed builds a corridor by which grace may one day pass to those who now sit at its margins. There is another lesson in the caravan's leaving. Leave-taking itself is formative. To bless those who depart is to relinquish control. It is to trust that God's purposes can be fulfilled by hands you will not guide. Isaac staying at the well is not refusal, but fidelity to an appointed place.
Keturah's son's departure is not abandonment, but cooperation with God's scattering. Both stances are holy, the steady guard at the center and the pilgrim setting forth. The life of faith learns to hold both, to be rooted and to be released, to tend what is near and to entrust what goes beyond. So let your soul be practiced in both tasks. Keep vigil where you are called to keep it.